Hey everyone, Greg Staley from Diverge Media. Recently, you may have seen an article of ours titled Mandatory Vaccines, Admission of Isolation Camps, and Forceful Removal from Your Home. Campaign Research, the chief polling firm of Doug Ford and his party, sends out terrifying survey. Now, the reason why you see we put it in quotes is because that quote actually comes from Randy Hillier. The independent MPP for Lanark-Frontenac Kingston had posted some concerning screenshots from a recipient of one of Campaign Research's polls. Those polls were shared with No More Lockdowns Canada, who put them out. Only roughly 2,500 people received these, so some of the screenshots are cut off and can't be read entirely, and it's also unclear at this point who commissioned the survey. But according to Mr. Hillier, the chief polling firm of Doug Ford is Campaign Research. It's the chief polling firm of Doug Ford and his party. So I think I included it in that article, but we recently found the full article, and so we're going to go from the actual poll itself. So for everyone here, let me go screenshot, share screen. Perfect. Okay. Got it? I think we got it. Alright, so a majority of voters across Canada oppose the government suspending civil rights and liberties, but surprisingly 38% of voters support these actions. There is less opposition from females over the age of 35. The question was, do you support or oppose the government suspending civil liberties and rights under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms for the duration of the pandemic? 2,413 people were polled. 12% strongly supported the suspension of civil liberties and rights for the duration of the pandemic. 26% somewhat supported that notion. 20% were somewhat opposed to that notion. 32% strongly opposed to suspension of rights and freedoms during the duration of the pandemic. And 11% took the easy way out and said, I don't know, I am unsure. But that is just the tip of the iceberg as far as these questions of this February Omnibus 2021 national study by Campaign Research. So it's a national omnibus study. It just basically includes a boatload of questions and asked a wide variety of people from, I think they broke it down. There's male, female breakdown and the parties as well. So in this one, they do a comparison on Canada, Liberal Party of Canada, Conservative Party of Canada, NDP, Green Party, Bloc Québécois, and then I found this one funny. I'm pretty sure they're referring to the PPC, but they just put another party. And so then we had a group refused, undecided. The undecided group, 10%. I'm not even sure what that means, undecided. In a group of itself, like undecided politically, like can move politically. Maybe that's what that means. But let's go into the questions that I have lined up from my article today. Check it out, share it out. Sorry, everyone. But I took what I thought were the most interesting and relevant questions and popped them in for you. It's all linked if you want to look at the breakdowns further politically. I didn't do that. I basically give you the breakdown across Canada and what people think on the questions. But let's go into question number one. Which is closer to your own view out of 2,413 people polled? Some people say, I'll just come back here. Sorry, everyone. I'll continue. Some people say we must continue to implement all possible restrictions to slow the spread of COVID-19 because that is the most important thing that we need to do right now. Result, 67% of Canadians polled picked this option. So 67% of Canadians say we must continue to implement all possible restrictions. So it almost sounds, that's kind of, you could misconstrue that to mean lockdown when they say all possible restrictions, but it does sound like they would support a lockdown. So 67% of Canadians polled said they would be in support of continuing to implement all possible restrictions And that's the most important thing we can do right now. Now, option B, other people say that implementing these restrictions is having more of a negative impact on people than COVID-19 is. Okay, so the restrictions are having more of a negative impact on COVID-19. If that's where you fall, this is probably closer to my camp. They point to people's economic situations, physical condition, psychological condition, and other hardships as reasons for not continuing. Result, 27% of Canadians polled picked this option. Now, I've often talking about people not thinking about the long-term consequences of the actions they're taking today. So I want good, solid health care, as do you. But if we neglect the fact that all this has to come from somewhere and it's not how our society was designed, it is just to stop, then healthcare could suffer in the future and other services could suffer. But at the very least, you're going to see a higher service of taxes, and eventually that it's the end of the toilet paper roll kind of theory in politics. When you get to a certain point with borrowing money, you're pulling off the toilet paper roll, and it's just a matter of time until the inflation runs out and the money runs out, and it's not a good option to just keep borrowing. It will come back to bite you eventually, especially when you bite off more than you can chew. But that's my opinion. Anyways, don't know, unsure. 7% of Canadians were unsure on that one. So 2,413 polled. Now, question number 2. It gets more draconian in nature. Do you support or oppose police being authorized to enter homes at their discretion without warrants to enforce compliance with COVID-19 restrictions? Wow. That's a heck of a question to even ask. And this is what went through my head, and why was it asked? Who wanted it to be asked? Do you support or oppose police being authorized to enter homes at their discretion without warrants to enforce compliance with COVID-19 restrictions? That's 2,413 polled. And so they want to know, do you support the police entering homes without warrants to enforce compliance with COVID-19 restrictions? Your personal residence, entering homes without warrants for compliance with COVID-19 restrictions. Like, what does that even mean? It's vague in nature. You should just say, that would make more sense if you've seen 80% say, I don't know. But this question, it's kind of interesting the way they worded it. But anyways, Canada, 67% said some people say we must continue to implement these, and this is the most important thing we need to do right now. So in that sense, 16% of Canadians strongly support police being authorized. Is it 16? Oh, okay, I see how I did this. That's my bad. All right. 16% of Canadians strongly supported. I put it at the bottom of the questions. So this is for this one. I was reading the one above it. Do you support or oppose? And that is, here we are, strongly support. 16% of Canadians strongly supported police being authorized to enter homes at their discretion without warrants. 22% somewhat supported the idea. I'm not even sure what somewhat supporting the idea means. Like, maybe in special circumstances, not just giving them gung-ho. I'm trying to see it from the other side. Why you would answer somewhat support. But somewhat oppose. 19% of Canadians somewhat oppose the notion. I'm not sure what somewhat oppose means. It means in some circumstances you'd be okay with it, maybe. Strongly oppose. 39% of Canadians strongly oppose the idea of police being authorized to enter homes at their discretion. Thank you. I would be in this group. I wish the complaint was much higher. And 4% said don't know. So that's the breakdown here. It varies across province a little bit. But on the strongly opposed, we'll go across province on strongly opposed. Canada-wide, 39%. Atlantic Canada, 34%. Quebec, 27%. Ontario at 44% strongly opposing the entering of homes. So by police without warrants. Manitoba, 40%. Saskatchewan, 38%. Alberta at 50%. So Alberta looking more conservative than the rest of Canada as they are considered, but there's one question where I seen earlier where Saskatchewan was more in disagreement or strongly opposed, and I was surprised by it. But we'll see if I can find it. Do you support or oppose, question number 3, police being authorized to establish vehicle checkpoints to pull over vehicles, to question drivers and occupants, to enforce compliance with COVID-19 restrictions? 2,413 people polled again. And 22% of Canadians polled strongly supported that police have the authorization to establish vehicle checkpoints, to pull over vehicles, and to question drivers and occupants. 30% of Canadians somewhat supported. So 52% of Canadians somewhat, of those polled, supported the idea or notion of police being able to establish checkpoints and pull over vehicles in check for compliance with COVID-19 restrictions. So that's half of society. That's kind of a scary one. 19% of Canadians polled somewhat opposed to the idea of police being authorized to establish vehicle checkpoints, and 26% of Canadians strongly opposed to the idea outright. Thank you. Thank you to those ones. So we can see the breakdown there. Yeah, and on the vehicle checkpoints, the most strongly opposed, again, Alberta, followed by British Columbia, I think, actually, ironically, and Saskatchewan, but they also had a high number of somewhat support. So I think you go Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, it looks like. But here we go. Get back to the screen for everyone so you can see what I'm seeing. Some of these charts are interesting to look at. This is on that last question. Well, support is much higher in Atlantic Canada and Quebec. Opposition to such activity is higher in Ontario and west of Ontario. Do you support or oppose police being authorized to establish pedestrian checkpoints to stop and question people outside of their homes to enforce compliance with COVID-19 restrictions? Strongly support. 18% of Canadians polled strongly supported police being authorized to establish pedestrian checkpoints to stop and question people outside of their homes to enforce compliance with COVID-19 restrictions. So I said, this is a little bit of my opinion, but that's a downright Orwellian idea. Who in their right mind would advocate for this to happen in their town or city? So I can't understand why this is even a thought in people's minds, to have the police stopping people in the street for no reason, no suspicion, just pedestrian checkpoints to stop and question people outside of their homes to enforce compliance. 28% of Canadians were somewhat supportive of that idea. 20% of Canadians polled somewhat opposed it, and 31% strongly opposed it, and 3% were unsure. So breakdown on that. Pedestrian checkpoints, who strongly opposed it. Canada, 31% strongly opposed. Males 18 to 34, 28% opposed. Males 35 to 54, I think that's 38% opposed. Males 55 plus, 32. And then females 18 to 34, 35, 29, and 25 respectively. Do you support or oppose police and health officials being authorized to separate family members at their discretion by removing people from homes and housing somewhere else to reduce or eliminate the risk of COVID-19 spread? Okay, can you pass me my water bottle? I don't know where mine is, but sorry. I have to fill that in a second too. All right. So that's a heavy question to ask anyways. I don't even know why it's being asked. Like, for what purpose or reason are you asking this question? Who wants to know? And why are they putting it out? So, do you support or oppose police and health officials being authorized to separate family members at their discretion? Not the court's discretion, at their discretion, by removing people from homes and housing them somewhere else to reduce or eliminate the risk of COVID spread. Okay. We already know about the COVID isolation centers. They're using hotels and different things across the country. They've set them up. We covered this in past articles, talking about it. We showed the tender bid and went through it and talked about the ambiguous wording that was used in it and how we were concerned about it. So now you're hearing this question in a survey that says, do you oppose police and health officials being authorized to separate family members at their discretion by removing people from homes and housing them somewhere else to what? Reduce or eliminate the risk of COVID-19. So now we're going to find this out from the tender bid on our article here. So I'm going to pull up my screen share to show you what I'm doing. Do you remember when we wrote that article? A while ago, eh? Do you remember when we wrote the isolation COVID camp article?
Which one?
Federal, okay, here it is. Federal isolation camps coming soon across Canada. Question mark. So, there is a tender bid, as you can see, our letter of interest, tender notice, for federal quarantine / isolation sites. Here's what they said. The government uses the government's very general language in the tender notice that states the government of Canada is considering engaging a third-party service provider for federal quarantine isolation sites that will be used to house and care for people for public health and other related federal requirements associated with the COVID-19 pandemic response. Hillier asked about this in the House, and this is what happened. Sorry, just a second here.
Next question, the member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Premier. In my supplemental question yesterday, I asked this government if the people of Ontario should prepare for internment camps. In September, the federal government posted a call for expressions of interest for contractors to supply, provide, and manage quarantine isolation camps throughout every province and every territory in Canada. These quarantine isolation camps, however, are not limited to people with COVID, but provide a wide latitude for many people to be detained. Surely this government is aware of the intentions to build these isolation camps from coast to coast. And my question to the Premier is, how many of these camps will be built? And how many people does this government expect to detain?
Question. Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is very true that when people leave the country and when they come back in, that the province is suggesting, and the federal government, in cooperation with the federal government, we are suggesting that people isolate themselves. That has been a practice that has been very successful, not only here in the province of Ontario, but across Canada. And we will, of course, be redoubling our efforts to make sure that the people of the province of Ontario remain safe, Mr. Speaker. So if the member is referring to the fact that that one of the public health policies is that when you return from a jurisdiction outside of the province of Ontario or from another country that you isolate yourself for 2 weeks, I would suggest that has been a good policy that has been working. In fact, this House has been doing the same thing since we came back. We are working in cohorts to make sure that the Legislative Assembly can continue to operate. That's why we have 2 separate cohorts, Mr. Speaker.
Response.
Cooperation with official opposition is why all members of the Independents have been excluded from that cohort, because we want them to be able to participate in debate. So we'll continue to do everything in our power to make sure that this House continues, but that the people of the province of Ontario and Canada are kept safe.
Supplementary question.
Again, thanks to the Premier. Here's the RFP. And in the RFP, it uses clear language to express that these camps can be used for a broad spectrum of people, not limited to travelers. Indeed, it doesn't even mention international travelers. It's just a broad latitude of people. And I'll send over the copy of the RFP after. So your government must be in negotiations and aware of these plans to potentially detain and isolate citizens and residents of our country and our province. So, Speaker, to the Premier, where will these camps be built? How many people will be detained? And for what reasons? For what reasons can people be kept in these isolation camps? And I'd like to have the Premier assure the people of Ontario.
Member, take a seat. The next question.
So that's our independent MPP, Randy Hillier from Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston, in the House, asking the question. Surely the government is aware of the intentions to build these isolation camps from coast to coast. And my question to the Premier is, how many of these camps will be built? And how many people does this government expect to detain? Not yet built. This is not a bid solidification. This RFI will not result in the award of any contract, but as we've seen some of the rebel stuff that has come out, it looks like they have started the process of building them. So more questions, general interest, where is it? This is breaking down the language in that tender. Federal quarantine/isolation sites that will be used to house and care for people for public health and other related federal requirements associated with the COVID-19 pandemic response. So, other federal requirements associated with the COVID-19 pandemic response. And then you go into the questions here that are part of my article that I've laid out, that are asking things like, do you support or oppose health officials and police being authorized to separate family members at their discretion by removing people from homes and housing them somewhere else to reduce or eliminate the risk of COVID spread? Unbelievable. So this was a federal tender. When was this released? Don't want to mix up my words here. October 21st, I wrote this. And this was from 2020, publication date, the 9th. So, yeah. So here's your date. Publication date here. Tender, notice, letter of interest, LOI, request for information, RFI. Service providers for federal quarantine/isolation sites, 6D112, all here. You can check it out. But unbelievable. So they're talking about it. In that document, you go into it. I say, what are other federal related requirements? What if they start forcing PCR testing on everyone on a weekly basis to participate in society? What if I refuse because the PCR test is inherently unreliable? Like, what are the reasons that you could end up there? Other related federal requirements associated with COVID-19 pandemic response. Then you go to the National Omnibus survey put out by Campaign Research, who Mr. Hillier says is one that's used by Doug Ford and the PC party. So, you put it all together and you go, that's interesting. Who commissioned the poll? So I've reached out to the PC party, and I've reached out to the Premier's office to ask about that. But we'll see if we get a response back. I don't know who commissioned it. But let's finish out a few of the other questions that were in here that stood out to me. Do you support or oppose the establishment of COVID-19 isolation centers? They just ask it outright, where people who are found in breach of COVID-19 related emergency measures could be taken to protect themselves. Listen to this wording here. To protect themselves and others from COVID-19 during the pandemic. You got to go to protect yourselves and others. Okay. So 24% of Canadians strongly supported this. 34% of Canadians somewhat supported it. 13% of Canadians somewhat opposed. 18% of Canadians strongly opposed. Now, if it's just a place where if you wanted to stay away from people that were your loved ones, that you cared about, family members, work reasons, and you needed a place to go and be away if somebody got genuinely sick, then sure. But questions like this are just a snapshot. You're not sure how people are interpreting that question either. So there's the breakdown. Let's go. Number 7. Do you support or oppose the government compelling cell phone companies to provide all individual location data on users for the purpose of enforcing compliance with COVID-19 emergency measures? Well, that's a very scary question to ask. Compelling cell phone companies to provide individual location data so they can enforce compliance of COVID-19 emergency measures. What if they put in a curfew like in Quebec, 8 p.m., and they're going to use cell phone data to enforce emergency measures related to COVID? What about if they think you're going out too much? What if they think you're putting all sorts of crazy amounts of power and information into the hands of those that are governing, and that's a scary thought to give the government that much power. But what did Canadians say? 13% of Canadians polled strongly supported the government compelling cell phone companies to provide all individual location data. 24% of Canadians polled somewhat supported the idea, 19% were somewhat opposed, and 38% only 38% strongly opposed. I wish that number was much higher. 7% said they didn't know. The highest rate of those opposed is Alberta again, followed by Ontario, followed by followed by British Columbia, and then Saskatchewan, Manitoba are tied. Do you support or oppose finding or jailing those who spread disinformation about COVID-19? For instance, questioning the existence or seriousness of COVID-19. For example, the question, is it just it's just the flu? That's the example they give. Strongly support, 29% of Canadians polled strongly supported the idea of jailing those who spread disinformation about COVID-19. Who gets to decide what's disinformation? This would include anyone who questions the existence of seriousness of COVID, i.e. it's just the flu. So if this would include, so they put it in the question to poll more people that are probably going to poll in the favor of that, but it's spread disinformation about COVID-19. Who decides? All right, they're saying, they use the example, it's just the flu, probably poll more people in their favor to strongly support or somewhat support that idea by using that language. And then this is how polling can be biased. But point that out, that's 2,413 people polled. And here we are. Strongly support, 29%. Somewhat support, 30%. 15% of Canadians somewhat opposed. 19% of Canadians strongly opposed. So it's amazing to me that number is not higher the other way around. Strongly opposed, most in, I guess, males, 35 to 54. And the last question here, do you support or oppose the government suspending civil rights and under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms for the duration of the pandemic? Just outright suspending civil rights and liberties, civil liberties, under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms for the entire duration of the pandemic. So when does the pandemic end? Who makes that metric? First off, does the government decide again? Is this like we're just telling them they're going to get house no matter what? But here's the breakdown. Basically, 38% of Canadians somewhat supported this through either strongly supporting or somewhat supporting. That's a scary number, but 12% were strongly supported this idea, 26%. Somewhat supported, 20% were somewhat opposed, and 32% polled strongly opposed. And 11% took the easy way out and said they didn't know or were unsure. So, but 38% polled supported the outright suspension of rights related. So I don't know if somewhat opposed. You're saying, how can you be somewhat supportive of the suspension of civil liberties and rights, like just certain ones? Either way, I'm okay lumping you in with the outright. Any suspension is an outright suspension. It's for the duration. Like maybe you don't see it that way, but if it's for the duration of the pandemic and the government decides that timeline, we've seen what they've done with goalposts on other metrics and measures during COVID. So don't be surprised if their definition of a pandemic keeps shifting as well if you give them the power to do that. But that's an interesting National Omnibus survey by Campaign Research you can check out. And we're going to check out one more thing today, which is a it's an older medical article on the important potential side effects of wearing face masks that should be bared in mind. So this is what the author says. We'll go into a screen share so you can see what I'm seeing again. Sorry, everyone. All right, British Medical Journal. In their editorial, Greenlay al. advised that surgical masks should be worn in public to prevent some transmission of COVID-19, adding that we should sometimes act without definitive evidence just in case. Two side effects of wearing face masks in public have already been highlighted. That's one, people wearing a mask may have a false sense of security and make people adopt a reduction in compliance with other important infection control measures. And two, people must avoid touching their mask and other management measures. Otherwise, masks are counterproductive. Other potential side effects that we must consider, however, are the quality and volume of speech between people wearing masks is considerably compromised, and they may unconsciously come closer to each other. They also those wearing a mask, that exhaled air goes into the eyes, and this generates an impulse to touch the eyes. If your hands are contaminated, you are infecting yourself. Face masks also make breathing more difficult. Moreover, a fraction of carbon dioxide previously exhaled is inhaled at each respiratory cycle. Those phenomenon increase breathing frequency and deepness, and they may worsen the burden of COVID-19 if infected. People wearing masks spread more contaminated air. Basically saying, if you get infected, this is my understanding, and you're wearing a mask, you're actually recycling the virus through the mask because you're rebreathing it, and it can spread more contaminated air. This may also worsen the clinical condition of infected people if the enhanced breathing pushes the viral load down into their lungs. So if you have COVID, it may make the clinical condition worse by wearing a mask. Continuing, the innate immunity's efficacy is highly dependent on the viral load. If masks determine a humid habitat where SARS-CoV-2 can remain active, because of the water vapor continuously provided by breathing and captured by the mask fabric, they determine an increase in viral load by re-inhaling exhaled viruses, and therefore they can cause a defeat of the innate immunity and an increase in infections. So again, right out of the British Medical Journal, this is just an important side note. Have another one here. Mask education, the benefits and burdens of wearing face masks in schools during the current corona pandemic. This one from August 11th, 2020. Again, they're old, but they didn't get discussed, and I think they're important to discuss even still now. Abstract, face masks can prevent the spread of the virus SARS-CoV-2, in particular, as the spread can occur from people with no symptoms. So they're following current narrative, at least the government's narrative, but they have something to say on the tail end of it. However, covering the lower half of the face reduces the ability to communicate, interpret, and mimic the expressions of those with whom we interact. Positive emotions become less recognizable, and negative emotions are amplified. Emotional mimicry, contagion, and emotionality in general are reduced, and thereby bonding between teachers and learners, group cohesion and learning, of which emotions are a major driver. The benefits and burdens of face masks in schools should be seriously considered and made obvious and clear to teachers and students. The school's specific situation must also inform any decision regarding face mask use. So it's pretty much universal across school boards where they're required now. And it's saying, have they all weighed and considered the effects of this potentially long-term on child development, on young adult development, young youth development? They're outlining it here. Emotional mimicry, contagion become less recognizable, negative emotions are amplified, and thereby bonding and cohesion are reduced, which is a major driver in learning. So that's another one I found interesting. And we have one more here. So the benefits and burdens of wearing face masks. This is that article expanded. Something in here, face. Side effects of mask use. It is a medical truism that everything has side effects. Everything that has effects also has side effects. The physical side effects of face masks have been mostly reported by medical professionals working in surgery in related surgical environments and science professionals working in labs. In a study of 158 healthcare workers during the COVID-19 pandemic, the most common side effect of prolonged face mask use was bilateral headache, reported by about 80% of the participants. Headaches occurred 1 to 4 times during a 30-day period of mask use and was rated as mild by the majority, 72%. Within 30 minutes of removal of the face mask, the pain resolved spontaneously. Pain medication such as non-steroid analgesics, was used in only a few cases. Face masks may further cause perioral dermatitis with rashes and redness, i.e. an infection of the skin around the mouth because of saliva, sweat, and moist vapor between the mask and the skin. This may provide a breeding ground for bacteria. Itchy rashes may be caused by irritant dermatitis caused by the mask and or the attached rubber strings around the skin on the nose and ears. An experimental study of the physical effects of wearing a surgical mask, N95 face mask, was performed with 5 healthy male and 5 healthy female subjects who performed intermittent exercise at a temperature of 25 degrees and a relative humidity of 70%. Both types of face mask led to significant differences in temperatures and humidity in the microclimates between face mask and skin. In particular, compared to the surgical mask, the N95 led to higher humidity and skin temperatures inside the face mask, higher heart rate, and increased negative sensations, including feeling unfit, tight, itchy, fatigued. The N95 led to higher. Okay, so the surgical, where are we at? A recent study of the cerebrovascular effects of face mask in young healthy males showed a 2% decrease in maximum power for the surgical mask and a 5% decrease of maximal power for the N95. That's interesting. Okay, that's not what I was looking for though. 5 mask. Here we go. Face masks impair verbal and non-verbal communication. Think about children in childhood development, and this is why I wanted to point this out. It's been roughly a year now, maybe over a year. I'm bad with dates, but we've been going since this hit. It's been almost a year now. So think of how this is affecting young children, especially. One of the richest and most powerful tools in human communication is the face, from which observers can quickly and easily make a number of inferences about identity, gender, sex, age, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, physical health, attractiveness, emotional state, personality traits, pain or physical pleasure, deception, and even social status. When strangers meet who speak 2 different languages which do not mutually understand, they can still interpret facial expressions such as smiles and frowns with ease and thereby communicate. In fact, the most basic form of communication between humans is by facial expression. This is because facial expressions are a simple universal language that we instinctively understand. It may be for this reason that many people do not like wearing face masks at all in the first place. Because we cannot see the lower half of the face when someone is wearing a mask, our ability to understand people is reduced considerably. We are forced to rely on language and gesture, which limits the extent to which we can interpret nuance. With some input from interpreting eye movements, which are still visible above the mask. In fact, evidence from eye movements, studies during gazing at a face suggest that the eye is the facial feature that is attended to first and longest during face processing, as they appear to be the most informative in communication. Once we direct our gaze to something, this something thereby can become the focus of our shared attention, which is the basic mechanism of doing things and solving problems together. But second, the eyes But second to the eyes are the regions of the mouth and nose when it comes to attending facial features. For effective verbal communication, covering the mouth with cloth has two detrimental consequences. First, the auditory signal is impaired, as face masks may dampen sound and amplitude, and especially may absorb frequency bands used in speech, especially if you're doubling, tripling up. Second, the visual signal from the lips is completely obstructed. While most people may have never have realized, this signal is used by human beings to aid speech understanding. From birth to about 8 months, babies look at their mother's mouth in order to parse the stream of sound into meaningful units, phonemes, in order to learn their mother tongue. Wow, that sounds important. In fact, if they are reared bilingually, they will have to learn a number of phonemes. I hope I am saying that right, and therefore start to look at their mother mouth earlier and for longer than monolinguals. When grown up, we tend to look close at the mouth of somebody under circumstances of impaired sound comprehensivity, such as noisy environments, low quality sound in movies and video calls. Deaf people use lip reading and thereby completely rely on visual cues for understanding speech, which is why there are special face masks which have a transparent piece over the mouth to meet the demand for visual speech input. Because speech transmission is impaired by mask wearing, there is a risk of misunderstanding when face masks are used widely in schools. Speaking through a face mask may dampen higher frequencies and therefore may impair verbal communication. The size of the effect depends on the speaker, the type of mask, the listener's hearing, and background noise, and may therefore vary between negligible and considerable. In addition, it is well known that visual cues help in speech recognition, which may be an additional cause of face mask-induced impairment of speech perception and communication. So, face masks block emotional signaling between teachers and students. Emotions play a large role in our society's interactions and our social interactions, of which teaching and learning are among the culturally most relevant. Recently, anthropologists have proposed that the most recent evolution of the human brain has been shaped by its increased capacity for the cultural transmission of knowledge, for example, teaching and learning. More than 50 years ago, building upon research by European ethologists from the school of Konrad Lorenz, the California psychologist Paul Ekman performed experiments to demonstrate the existence of basic emotions regardless of culture, surprise, fear, disgust, anger, happiness, and sadness. It is long known that negative affect implies more fine-grained perceptual and cognitive processing, whereas positive effects lead to more holistic processing. Accordingly, it has been shown that emotions which are perceived in faces have effect on the style. Faces are have effect on the style. Faces are processed in the first place. A face that is perceived to have a negative emotion is processed in a less holistic manner than a face displaying a positive emotion. Of course, this is the case for the processing of other non-face content. Smiling broadens and cognition and thereby increases creative thinking. Whereas criticism causes anxiety and a reduction in creativity, a student looking at the critical face of a teacher thereby becomes less at the critical face of a teacher thereby becomes less critical and thereby less able to solve math problems, which increases the likelihood of math anxiety to develop. This decreases creativity further, as well as increases anxiety of not being capable of doing mathematics in a vicious circle independent of mathematical talent. That is an interesting way to put that. As stated above, the face provides a universal language for communication, in particular, the communications of emotions. So the most prominent meaning of a smile, however, definitively is a positive emotion. Given that the real smile involves the upper and lower half of the face, with the upper half providing the distinctive frowning that renders a true smile, there's a lot of room for misunderstanding. Face masks block the smile and allow only for the frowning to be communicated, which actually may be worse than no smile at all. In general, as face masks cover the bottom of the face, the ability to detect positive emotions and to discriminate between emotions is considerably impaired. In 2017, researchers at the university, this is long, we're just kind of the summary here. In summary, recognition and response to the outward emotion of displays of one peer's face is a critical and necessary component of social interaction in schools. It helps pupils and teachers to modify their behavior in order to align with social communication and behavioral norms. When these emotional displays are inhibited by face masks, our ability to communicate effectively with one another is reduced, and we are primarily left with mimicking negative frown emotions. All of this happens primarily outside of conscious awareness, and hence is hard to be considerably controlled or even corrected. Since emotions are a major driver of group cohesion, the decreased emotionality and decreased positive emotionality in particular may interfere with smooth classroom action. Given the fact that the very process of learning is facilitated by emotions, this is the main reason that's rare. Face masks are likely to cause some interference with pedagogy. Discussion: to wear a mask or not. In society where the large majority of people wear face masks, there's a lot of room for mutual emotional misinterpretation and therefore misunderstanding. People may feel that someone is being aggressive towards them when there's no real intent of aggression, but in fact it's a true or genuine smile, and they may react accordingly, potentially leading to all sorts of difficult and even dangerous situations. This regards schools as well. Therefore, at the very least, all school professionals should be aware of the detrimental effects of face masks on face recognition and identification, communication, and social emotional interaction. This should be weighed against the alternatives, i.e. school closures with the enormous burden on children and parents, and school reopenings without masks, with their increased risk of new infections. In Germany, school authorities are rather reluctant to reopen schools after the summer break, but also face increasing criticism for not doing so. In addition, teachers' unions point to the increased risk of elderly teachers to contract a potentially lethal disease. The ideas of what to do about in times of a pandemic do not exist in contextual vacuum. In fact, our dealings are far from balanced and contradiction-free. We have to make sure physical distancing in theaters, but not in physical distancing in theaters, but not in airplanes. We may shop with masks in supermarkets, but eat without them in restaurants. We may have assemblies with friends and families, but not have seminars at the university, etc. Of particular relevance for schools may be the experiences with face masks in hospitals, including psychiatric hospitals, such as the clinic which I am heading. I implemented the general use of face masks for all staff and patients on the 16th of March in 2020, and it soon became clear that they interfere with practicing psychiatry. The decreased emotional observability made the job harder to do. That's an interesting viewpoint. A psychotherapist wrote me an email noting that socially complicated and challenging inpatients in psychotherapy are very difficult to treat, as dissociative states and tensions are much harder to detect early enough so that appropriate interventions can be performed. In addition, exposition training, such as patients after trauma, patients with panic disorder, and patients with obsessive compulsive disorder OCD, which implies the conscious provocation of anxiety, are hard to do with face masks obstructing the perception of the patient's emotions. Even in diagnostic interviews, face masks interfere with decisions regarding diagnosis and therapy. It's a big deal. And you can extrapolate that idea out onto the general populace and the effects it's going to have. This is the whole reason to bring this up. Yes, it's an older article, but show me the one that says something different that addresses these concerns. A hairdresser from another city sent an email. One of the lockdown was able to restart his business. Yesterday I had 2 new customers, and I must say that I just had them ask them to go outside so we could remove our mask briefly. It's so difficult to give advice as to what haircut should be done when you cannot fully see the face of the customer. I also talked to them about how to communicate with masks as smiles no longer works. My team, I talked with them about, because smiles no longer work. We therefore attempt to verbally communicate in a more positive manner in order to counteract the lacking smiles. So interesting, but they're acknowledging the issues. Also, as regards the problems of communication and emotional signaling, it should be noted that emotions can also be decoded from the body posture, a process quite similar to the decoding from faces, as well as from prosody, the melody of speech and gesture. Yeah, they're pretty pro-narrative, but they point some of these issues out. So as already discussed, the general remark should be considered. Face masks serve the additional benefit of reminding everybody who's present at school of the lingering presence. So you can see where they stand. The lingering presence of the pandemic, it reminds them of it. So that's great. And they will keep their behaviors relevant. Okay. A face mask protects the person wearing it and the person with whom or she talks. So using a mask amounts to doing a favor to others and oneself. Okay, well, you can clearly see they're biased. So why not wearing a face mask is a simple tool for social behavior training? Okay, that's their closing. As a simple tool for social behavior training. So they're saying it's a great thing. After all that, they outline the concerns they close with. It's a great thing because it outline. We can learn about we can learn about body language and human development. So that's interesting. But anyways, a little bit longer than I would have liked to have gone through on that one, but I think it's a good place to close. I wanted to get the thoughts on the other side of the mask, but I didn't realize it was their opinion was heavily biased. I'd recognized that, but then I seen how they closed out there, and that's just, it's kind of funny almost to close out that way. What did they say? Closed out with no, yeah, they're all in favor anyways. Finally, their position is in favor of the lockdowns, or sorry, not of the lockdowns, but of the mask. And then you would recognize other human behavior as a result, they're saying, of wearing the mask. They're saying, why not treat it as an experiment and we can learn about gesture and body language. But anyways, interesting. Thank you for joining us here at Diverge Media. We look forward to seeing you next time, Tuesdays and Fridays, 7 p.m. Eastern, and join us next Wednesday at 8:30 p.m. Eastern as we go live. We look forward to speaking with you in the comments section, and if you're not subscribed, make sure to subscribe. Thank you. I'm Greg Staley, and have a great day.